I never thought I'd find myself in a standoff with an HOA president over my RV in my own driveway, but life has a funny way of serving up irony when you least expect it. "That eyesore needs to be gone by tomorrow, or I'll have it towed and impounded," Karen Voss declared, her manicured finger jabbing toward my 32-foot Class C motorhome that I'd spent the last 2 years restoring. Her platinum blonde bob didn't move an inch in the autumn breeze, probably held in place by the same rigid inflexibility that defined her personality. I'd been in Pinecrest Estates exactly 3 days. After 15 years in law enforcement in Phoenix, I'd accepted the sheriff position in Meadow Creek County, hoping for a quieter life. The RV was my weekend escape plan, my sanctuary when the job got heavy. I hadn't even finished unpacking. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there's nothing in the HOA bylaws prohibiting recreational vehicles when stored on a paved surface alongside the home," I replied calmly, having done my homework before buying the property. The way her eyes narrowed told me she wasn't used to being challenged. "I'm Karen Voss, president of Pinecrest Estates Homeowners Association. I decide how the bylaws are interpreted," she said, her voice rising just enough to attract the attention of my next-door neighbor who was walking his golden retriever. "And I say this monstrosity violates our aesthetic standards clause." I extended my hand, which she reluctantly shook. "Ian Grayson. New homeowner and, as of Monday, the new sheriff of Meadow Creek County." Her face didn't register the information immediately. The neighbor with the retriever, however, broke into a wide smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Sheriff," he called out. "Don't mind Karen. She runs this place like her personal kingdom." Karen's eyes widened slightly as the implications of my position began to sink in. But rather than back down, she doubled down. "Your occupation doesn't exempt you from our rules, Mr. Grayson. I expect that RV moved by tomorrow, or the association will take action." With that, she spun on her heel and marched down my driveway. Little did I know that this minor confrontation was just the opening skirmish in what would become a full-blown war, one that would eventually expose corruption that ran deeper than I could have imagined in my quiet new community. The next morning, I left early for my first official day as sheriff. The department was small, just me, 2 full-time deputies, and 3 part-timers covering a rural county of about 15,000 people. I spent most of the day getting acquainted with the office, the filing system, still mostly paper, and meeting the county commissioners. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, my RV was gone. For a moment, I sat in my cruiser, staring at the empty space beside my house, feeling that slow burn of anger rise in my chest. Then I noticed a piece of paper taped to my front door. I snatched it off and read, "Notice of violation and temporary seizure. Your recreational vehicle has been temporarily relocated to our community storage facility due to violation of Aesthetic Standards Clause 5.3. Contact HOA offices for retrieval instructions." It was signed by Karen Voss, with an official-looking Pinecrest Estates HOA stamp below. I pulled out my phone and called the number listed on the notice. "Pinecrest Estates HOA office, this is Abigail speaking." "This is Ian Grayson at 1472, Pinecrest Drive. My RV has been removed from my property without my consent. I'd like to speak with Karen Voss." "Oh, Mr. Grayson," the voice hesitated. "Mrs. Voss isn't available right now. But she did leave instructions about your situation. There's a $350 emergency removal fee plus $75 per day storage. Once that's paid, you can relocate your vehicle to an off-site storage facility." I took a deep breath. "Abigail, please inform Mrs. Voss that what she's done constitutes theft of property valued at over $50,000. I'll be filing a police report, with myself, actually, and if my RV isn't returned to my property, undamaged, by 9 a.m. tomorrow, I'll be pursuing criminal charges." The line went silent for a moment. I'll pass that along, Mr. Grayson." I hung up and immediately called the department, asking Deputy Morris to come take an official report. While waiting, I pulled out the HOA covenant documents I'd received during my home purchase and reviewed them thoroughly. As I suspected, there was no provision allowing the HOA to remove vehicles from private property without a court order. Deputy Morris arrived 20 minutes later, and we went through the formal process of filing a theft report. I could tell he was uncomfortable documenting a case against the HOA president. "You really want to push this, Sheriff?" he asked as he finished writing. "Karen Voss is connected to everyone in this county. Her husband sits on the town council, and her brother-in-law is Judge Randall. All the more reason to do things by the book," I replied. "Nobody's above the law, Deputy. Not even well-connected HOA presidents." After Morris left, I was pulling a frozen dinner from the microwave when my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a woman about my age with auburn hair and an apologetic expression. "Hi, I'm Amelia Warner from 4 Doors Down. I heard about your run-in with Karen and wanted to check if you're okay." I invited her in, and she declined my offer of coffee but accepted a seat at my kitchen table, still half covered with unpacked boxes. "Karen's pulled stunts before, but taking someone's RV? That's a new low," Amelia said, shaking her head. "Most of us are too afraid to stand up to her. The last family that tried had their mailbox vandalized 3 times and suddenly started failing random property inspections until they sold and moved." "How long has she been running things this way?" I asked. "About 6 years. She started as just a board member, but then the previous president had a stroke. Karen stepped in temporarily and has managed to maintain control ever since. The annual elections are suspicious at best." I offered Amelia a soda from the fridge, which she accepted. "The thing is," she continued, "it's not just the power trips. There are financial questions too. Our HOA fees keep going up, but services keep getting cut. The community pool hours were reduced last summer, landscaping is minimal, and the promised playground renovation never happened despite a special assessment 2 years ago. Has anyone looked into the finances?" I asked. Amelia laughed humorlessly. "Karen's husband is the treasurer, and her best friend is the secretary. They present financial summaries at meetings, not detailed reports. Anyone who asks questions gets shut down for disrupting proceedings." We talked for another half hour. Amelia, I learned, was a high school biology teacher who'd lived in Pinecrest for 8 years. She gave me names of other homeowners who'd had run-ins with Karen, a list longer than I expected. After Amelia left, I sat at my kitchen table considering my options. This was my first week on the job in a new community. I didn't want to make powerful enemies right away, but I also couldn't let someone steal my property and get away with it. My phone rang just after 10 p.m. It was Karen Voss herself. "Sheriff Grayson," she began without preamble, "I understand you filed some sort of complaint about your RV situation." "That's correct, Mrs. Voss. Theft of property." She made a dismissive sound. "Don't be dramatic. Your vehicle has simply been relocated according to HOA emergency protocols. We had an urgent situation arise, a community member needed temporary housing after a domestic issue. Your RV was the logical solution." I nearly dropped my phone. "You took my private property to house someone else. Without permission. That's not just theft, Mrs. Voss. That's breaking and entering as well. It's being put to good use for the community," she replied, as if that justified everything. "Look, I'm willing to waive the removal and storage fees as a welcome gesture. But the RV needs to stay where it is for at least 2 weeks. After that, you can reclaim it and move it off-site. Mrs. Voss, I want my property returned to my driveway by 9 a.m. tomorrow, in the exact condition it was taken, or I will execute a search warrant and arrest whoever is in possession of stolen property." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "You really don't want to make an enemy of me, Sheriff. This is a small community. People listen to me. And you really don't want to commit felonies against the county sheriff, Mrs. Voss. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up and immediately called Judge Reynolds, the one county judge I'd met during my interview process. After explaining the situation, he agreed to sign a search warrant, though he warned me I was poking a hornet's nest. At 9:15 the next morning, with no sign of my RV being returned, I executed the search warrant at the Pinecrest Estates Community Storage Facility, a fenced lot behind the clubhouse. My RV wasn't there. The facility manager, a nervous man named Clive, admitted that Karen had instructed him to lie if I came looking. "Where is my RV, Clive?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "It's at her son's place," he finally admitted. "Tyler Voss lives in the countryside, about 5 miles north. Karen had it towed there yesterday." With Deputy Morris following in his patrol car, I drove to the address Clive provided. Sure enough, my RV was parked in the gravel driveway of a small ranch house. A young woman was sitting on the front steps, smoking a cigarette. She jumped up when we pulled in. "Who are you?" she demanded. I showed her my badge. "Sheriff Grayson. That's my RV, which was stolen from my property yesterday." "And you are?" She looked panicked. "Jessica. Tyler's girlfriend. Mrs. Voss said we could use this for a while because our landlord evicted us." "Did she mention it belongs to someone else? That she took it without permission?" Jessica's face fell. "She said it belonged to the HOA and they loan it out for emergencies." "Oh God, Tyler's going to kill me." I looked around. "Where is Tyler now?" "At work. He's a security guard at the mall in Riverdale." I examined my RV while Deputy Morris took Jessica's statement. Someone had clearly been living in it, there were fast food wrappers on the counter and the bed was unmade. The ignition had been hot-wired. "Morris," I called, "add breaking and entering, criminal damage, and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle to the report." Jessica started crying. "Please don't arrest me. I didn't know it was stolen. Mrs. Voss is Tyler's mom, we thought it was legit." I felt bad for the young woman, who appeared to be in her early 20s. "I'm not arresting you today, Jessica. But I will need a formal statement about exactly what Karen Voss told you about this RV." After arranging for a tow truck to return my RV to my property, at the county's expense for now, I'd be seeking reimbursement, I asked Morris to take Jessica's full statement at the station. I headed back to my office to prepare for the next step. By mid-afternoon, I had statements from Jessica, Clive, and 2 tow truck operators who confirmed Karen Voss had personally ordered the removal of my RV, claiming HOA authority. I also had a preliminary examination of my HOA covenant documents from the county attorney, who confirmed there was no provision allowing for seizure of private property. I was preparing an arrest warrant when my office phone rang. It was the county commissioner, Richard Hartwell. "Ian, I understand you're having some sort of dispute with Karen Voss." I explained the situation as neutrally as possible. "Look," he said, sounding uncomfortable, "Karen and her husband are major contributors to local campaigns. They host the annual fundraiser for the sheriff's department, for God's sake. Can't you work this out without arrests and warrants? Commissioner, if someone stole your car, hot-wired it, and gave it to someone else to use, would you want me to work it out or uphold the law?" "That's different," he protested. "No, sir, it isn't. The law applies equally to everyone, campaign donors included." After hanging up with the commissioner, I called Amelia Warner, who had left her number the night before. "I'm building a case against Karen Voss," I told her. "You mentioned financial irregularities with the HOA. Would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you know?" "I don't know enough details to be helpful," she admitted. "But Howard Jennings might. He was on the board until last year when Karen forced him out. He's an accountant and kept asking questions about the budget. Howard Jennings turned out to be a retired CPA who lived on the east side of the subdivision. When I visited him that evening, he was more than happy to talk. "I've been waiting for someone to finally look into that woman," he said, inviting me into his meticulously kept home. I kept copies of everything. He disappeared into his home office and returned with a thick folder. These are the financial documents from my time on the board. Notice anything strange about the landscaping expenses? I examined the papers. The HOA was paying nearly $8,000 monthly for landscaping services to a company called VGA Enterprises. That seems high for the minimal maintenance I've seen, I commented. Howard nodded. VG Enterprises is owned by Victor Goss, who happens to be Karen's brother. And here's the kicker, I did some research. VGI has no other clients, no employees on record, and operates out of a P.O. box. I strongly suspect it's a shell company funneling HOA funds to the Voss family. I flipped through more documents. What about this special assessment for playground equipment? Amelia mentioned it was never completed. Ah yes, $65,000 collected from homeowners. The board approved a bid from Meadow Creek Construction, which, surprise surprise, is owned by a cousin of Karen's husband. They did some preliminary work, tore out the old equipment, then claimed supply chain issues. 2 years later, we still have an empty playground with a chain-link fence around it. By the time I left Howard's house, I had enough documentation to justify a financial investigation alongside the theft case. I returned to my office and spent half the night writing everything up. The next morning, I called the state police and requested their financial crimes unit's assistance. Given the potential conflicts of interest with local officials, I wanted an independent investigation. I was updating the case file when my office door burst open. Karen Voss stormed in, followed by a man I presumed was her husband. "How dare you," she shouted. "You're terrorizing my son and his girlfriend, trespassing on private property, and now spreading rumors about HOA finances. This ends now." I remained seated, motioning to the chairs across from my desk. "Please have a seat, Mrs. Voss. And you must be Mr. Voss." "George Voss," the man said stiffly. He was tall, expensively dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Town councilman and attorney. This witch hunt stops immediately, or you'll find yourself looking for a new job." I leaned back in my chair. Interesting approach, coming in with threats when you're both potentially facing criminal charges. "Would you like me to record this conversation for the prosecutor, or would you prefer to step back and reconsider your position?" Karen looked like she might explode, but George placed a restraining hand on her arm. "What exactly are you investigating?" he asked more cautiously. "Currently, theft, breaking and entering, criminal damage to property, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, abuse of power, and potentially financial fraud involving HOA funds. Would you like to make a statement regarding any of these matters?" Karen found her voice again. "This is ridiculous. I was helping a young couple in need using community resources." "My RV is not a community resource," I replied evenly. "It's my private property, which you stole and damaged. Your son had to hot-wire it to use it." George's lawyer instincts visibly kicked in. "Karen, don't say anything else." He turned to me. "Sheriff, surely we can resolve the vehicle matter with restitution for any damages. As for these vague financial allegations, they're baseless and potentially defamatory." "The State Police Financial Crimes Unit might disagree," I said. "They'll be arriving tomorrow to begin their investigation." That got their attention. Karen went pale, while George's professional demeanor cracked. "You called in the state police? Without even discussing your concerns with the HOA board first?" he demanded. "Just like you didn't discuss borrowing my RV with me first," I replied. "And yes, when I find evidence of potential financial crimes involving locally connected individuals, I follow proper protocol by requesting independent investigators." George stood up abruptly. "We're done here. Karen, let's go. Sheriff, you'll be hearing from our attorney." After they left, my phone immediately rang. It was Commissioner Hartwell again, this time nearly shouting. "What the hell are you doing? George Voss just called me, absolutely livid. You've been on the job for 3 days and you're already investigating prominent community members. Commissioner, I said calmly, I'm investigating crimes that were committed against me personally, as well as potential financial fraud that's been reported by multiple citizens. Would you prefer I ignore criminal activity when it involves people with connections? The call ended with Hartwell making vague warnings about political realities and community harmony. I was beginning to understand why the previous sheriff had taken early retirement. By the next morning, word had spread throughout Pinecrest Estates. When I returned from my morning briefing with deputies, Amelia Warner was standing on my porch with a plate of cookies. "Thought you might need these," she said with a smile. "The neighborhood grapevine is buzzing about your showdown with the Vosses." I invited her in and put on coffee. "I'm guessing not everyone's happy about it." "Are you kidding? Most people are thrilled someone's finally standing up to Karen. A few are worried, of course, the ones who've benefited from her favoritism. But Howard Jennings has been calling everyone who'll listen, saying that day of reckoning is coming." I laughed despite myself. "I'm just doing my job. Though I'll admit, having my RV stolen my first week in town wasn't how I planned to start." "How bad was the damage?" she asked. "Nothing major. They hot-wired it, but it's an older model so it wasn't too complicated to repair. They left food wrappers everywhere and used all my propane, but otherwise it's intact." Amelia stayed for coffee, and I found myself enjoying her company. She had a sharp wit and an easy laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in my previous work in Phoenix. When she finally left for school, my day felt brighter despite the storm clouds gathering on my professional horizon. The state police financial investigators arrived around noon, two serious-looking officers who set up in our small conference room and began reviewing the documents I'd gathered. By mid-afternoon, they had enough to justify subpoenas for the HOA's complete financial records, Karen and George's personal bank accounts, and the business records of VG Enterprises and Meadow Creek Construction. "This is textbook embezzlement," the lead investigator told me. "The shell companies, the inflated contracts, the diverted funds. If the documentation backs up what we've seen so far, these people are looking at significant jail time." Just as they were preparing to leave, Deputy Morris burst into my office. "Sheriff, there's trouble at your house. Multiple reports of people on your property. Sounds like the HOA is trying to tow your RV again." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Call Judge Reynolds. Tell him I need an emergency restraining order against the Pinecrest Estates HOA and specifically Karen Voss." When I arrived home, I found a tow truck in my driveway and Karen Voss standing beside it with three men I didn't recognize. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. I parked my cruiser to block the tow truck and stepped out. "What's happening here, Mrs. Voss?" Karen turned to face me, a triumphant expression on her face. "Emergency board meeting this morning, Sheriff. We've amended the bylaws to prohibit all recreational vehicles from being kept on properties, effective immediately. We're removing this eyesore as authorized by our updated covenants. You can't retroactively create rules and instantly enforce them," I said, loud enough for the watching neighbors to hear. "That's not how contract law works. And given that your previous theft of this vehicle is still under investigation, this looks a lot like intimidation of a witness." One of the men stepped forward. "I'm Dennis Parker, HOA attorney. I assure you the board's actions are perfectly legal. The covenant agreement all homeowners sign grants the board the right to amend rules as needed for community welfare. And I'm executing a criminal investigation," I replied, "which takes precedence over your HOA rules. This vehicle is currently evidence in an ongoing criminal case." I turned to the tow truck operator. "Sir, you're about to become involved in obstruction of justice and criminal theft. I strongly suggest you leave now." The driver looked uncertainly between me and Karen. "Lady, you didn't say nothing about the police being involved." "I ain't touching this." He climbed back into his truck. Karen stepped in front of it. "You have a contract. I'll sue your company if you don't do your job." "Sue away," he called through the window as he carefully maneuvered around her. I ain't getting arrested today. As the tow truck departed, Karen's face contorted with rage. She turned to the gathering crowd of neighbors. You're all witnesses to this abuse of power. He's using his position as sheriff to avoid following our community rules. To her evident shock, no one spoke in her support. In fact, several neighbors were openly filming the confrontation on their phones, and a few were smiling. Howard Jennings stepped forward from the crowd. Karen, the game is up. We've all had enough. Stay out of this, Howard, she snapped. I don't think I will, the older man replied calmly. I've been sharing what I know about the HOA finances with my neighbors. Everyone here has questions about where their money has been going. Like the $65,000 for playground equipment that never materialized. Or why we're paying premium rates for substandard landscaping to a company that seems to exist only on paper. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's attorney touched her arm. We should leave, Mrs. Voss. This isn't productive. She shrugged him off. I've done nothing wrong. Everything I've done has been for this community. At that moment, Deputy Morris arrived with papers in hand. Sheriff, got the emergency restraining order from Judge Reynolds. Karen Voss and all Pinecrest Estates HOA representatives are to remain at least 100 yards from your property and vehicle. I took the papers and handed them to the HOA attorney. I suggest you explain to your client what this means, counselor. The attorney skimmed the document and nodded grimly. Mrs. Voss, we need to leave immediately. Karen looked ready to argue further, but something in the attorney's expression stopped her. With a final glare at me and the assembled neighbors, she stalked to her Mercedes and drove away, the two remaining men following in a separate car. As the crowd began to disperse, Amelia approached me, her phone still in her hand. Got it all on video, she said with a grin. Just in case you need it for your case. Thanks, I replied, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. I didn't expect her to try something like this so openly. Karen's never been good at backing down, Amelia said. It's always worked for her before. She's not used to anyone standing their ground. Howard Jennings joined us, extending his hand. Sheriff Grayson, I believe we have our community's true best interests aligned. Several of us are planning to attend the next HOA meeting to call for the board's resignation. Would you consider coming as well? Not as sheriff, but as a homeowner. I shook his hand. I'll be there, Mr. Jennings. Though I suspect things might change even before that meeting happens. They did. The next morning, the State Police Financial Crimes Unit executed search warrants at the Voss residence, their business offices, and the HOA office. By afternoon, they had seized computers, financial records, and boxes of documents. The preliminary findings were damning. Over 6 years, approximately $430,000 in HOA funds had been diverted through fraudulent contracts and inflated invoices to companies connected to the Voss family. The special assessment for the playground had indeed been misappropriated, with only $8,000 of the $65,000 collected actually spent on the project before it was abandoned. Most disturbing was the discovery that Karen had been selectively enforcing rules and issuing arbitrary fines against homeowners she disliked, while ignoring violations by friends and family. The fines, often paid under protest, had created another slush fund used for board expenses that seemed to primarily consist of expensive dinners and personal purchases. 3 days after the investigation began, I had the grim satisfaction of arresting Karen and George Voss on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and financial exploitation. As I read them their rights in their luxurious living room, Karen maintained her indignant denial. This community was nothing before I took over, she insisted as Deputy Morris handcuffed her. I made Pinecrest Estates what it is. The property values have doubled because of my standards. Save it for your attorney, Mrs. Voss, I told her. And for the record, taking my RV was probably the biggest mistake of your career. If you just left my property alone, I might never have looked deeper into how you operate. George Voss, ever the pragmatist, was already talking about cooperation and plea agreements before we even reached the patrol car. The county prosecutor, initially reluctant to pursue charges against such prominent community members, changed his tune when the state police laid out the evidence. With homeowners coming forward daily with new stories of intimidation and selective enforcement, the case against the Vosses grew stronger by the hour. Tyler Voss and his girlfriend Jessica were charged with lesser counts related to the theft of my RV, but after they provided full statements about Karen's instructions, the prosecutor offered them probation. 2 weeks after the arrests, Pinecrest Estates held a special community meeting. The remaining board members, all Karen's appointees, resigned en masse. Howard Jennings was elected interim HOA president until formal elections could be held, with a mandate to reform the association's operations and financial controls. I attended as both a homeowner and as sheriff, standing at the back of the packed community center. When Howard announced the full accounting of misappropriated funds and a plan to pursue civil recovery from the Voss family, the room erupted in applause. Additionally, Howard announced, "We'll be reviewing and likely rescinding many of the rule changes implemented during the previous administration, particularly those that appear to have been created for selective enforcement rather than community benefit." More applause followed. I felt a touch on my arm and turned to find Amelia beside me. "Quite the first month on the job," she said with a smile. "You've made some powerful enemies and a lot of grateful friends." "Just doing my job," I replied. Though I'll admit, I didn't expect to be investigating organized crime in an HOA when I moved here. "Are you having second thoughts about taking the position?" I looked around at the room full of neighbors, many of whom had stopped by in recent days to introduce themselves or drop off welcome gifts after the story broke. "Not at all," I told her truthfully. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The meeting concluded with the announcement that the abandoned playground project would be restarted immediately, using recovered funds. As people began to file out, several stopped to shake my hand or offer words of thanks. Howard made his way through the crowd to reach me. "Sheriff, the board would like to formally apologize for your experience with the previous administration. We hope you'll still consider Pinecrest Estates your home." "Apology accepted, though unnecessary," I assured him. "And yes, I'm here to stay." "Excellent," he beamed. "Oh, and we've already amended the bylaws to explicitly state that recreational vehicles are permitted when parked on proper surfaces alongside homes. Your RV is officially welcome." I laughed. "I appreciate that. Though after all this, I'm thinking my first RV trip might need to be soon. I could use a quiet weekend in the mountains." "You should show him Aspen Creek," Amelia suggested to Howard. "It's perfect this time of year." "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I was thinking I might need a guide who knows the area. Any interest in coming along?" I asked her. Amelia's smile widened. "I thought you'd never ask. I make excellent campfire coffee." As we walked out into the cool evening air, I glanced back at my RV parked in my driveway, the unwitting catalyst for uncovering corruption and bringing a community together. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. And sometimes, standing your ground is all it takes to start changing things for the better. 2 months later, with the Vosses awaiting trial and a reformed HOA functioning transparently under Howard's leadership, Amelia and I did take that trip to Aspen Creek. And as we sat beside the campfire, watching the stars appear above the mountains, I realized that sometimes the worst welcome to a new home can lead to the best possible beginning.